Aurora Leigh Book 6th Elizabeth Barrett Browning. The English have a scornful insular way of calling the French light. The levity is in the judgment only, which yet stands, for say a foolish thing but oft enough. And here's the secret of 100 creeds: men get opinions as boys learn to spell, by reiteration chiefly. The same thing shall pass at last for absolutely wise, and not with fools exclusively. And so we say the French are light, as if we said the cat mews or the milch cow gives us milk. Say rather, cats are milk and milch cows mew. For what is lightness but inconsequence, vague fluctuation twixt effect and cause compelled by neither? Is a bullet light that dashes from the gun mouth, while the eye winks and the heart beats one, to flatten itself to a wafer on the white speck on a wall 100 paces off? Even so direct, so sternly undivertible of aim, is this French people. All, idealists too absolute and earnest, with them all the idea of a knife cuts real flesh. And still, devouring the safe interval which nature placed between the thought and act with those two fiery and impatient souls, they threaten conflagration to the world, and rush with most unscrupulous logic on impossible practice. Set your orators to blow upon them with loud windy mouths, through watchword phrases, just our sentiment, which drive our burly brutal English mobs like so much chaff. Whichever way they blow, this light French people will not thus be driven. They turn indeed, but then they turn upon some central pivot of their thought and choice, and veer out by the force of holding fast. That's hard to understand, for Englishmen unused to abstract questions, and untrained to trace the involutions, valve by valve, in each orbed bulb root of a general truth, and mark what subtly fine integument divides opposed compartments. Freedom's self comes concrete to us, to be understood, fixed in a feudal form incarnately to suit our ways of thought and reverence, the special form, with us, being still the thing. With us, I say, though I'm of Italy by mother's birth and grave, by father's grave and memory. Let it be a poet's heart can swell to a pair of nationalities, however ill-lodged in a woman's breast. And so I am strong to love this nobile France, this poet of the nations, who dreams on and wails on while the household goes to wreck forever, after some ideal good, some equal poise of sex, some unvowed love inviolate, some spontaneous brotherhood, some wealth that leaves none poor and finds none tired, some freedom of the many that respects the wisdom of the few. Heroic dreams. Sublime, to dream so? Natural, to wake, and sad, to use such lofty scaffoldings, erected for the building of a church, to build instead a brothel or a prison. May God save France. And if at last she sighs her great soul up into a great man's face, to flesh his temples out so gloriously that few dare carp at Cassar for being bald, what then? This Cassar represents, not reigns, and is no despot, though twice absolute. This head has all the people for a heart. This purple's lined with the democracy, now let him see to it. For a rent within would leave irreparable rags without. A serious riddle, find such anywhere except in France. And when 'tis found in France, be sure to read it rightly. So, I mused up and down, the terrace streets, the glittering boulevards, the white colonnades of fair fantastic Paris, who wears trees like plumes, as if man made them, spire and tower as if they had grown by nature, tossing up her fountains in the sunshine of the squares, as if in beauty's game she tossed the dice, or blew the silver down balls of her dreams to sow futurity with seeds of thought and count the passage of her festive hours. The city swims in verdure, beautiful as Venice on the waters, the sea swan. What bosky gardens dropped in close-walled courts like plums in ladies' laps who start and laugh, what miles of streets that run on after trees, still carrying all the necessary shops, those open caskets with the jewels seen. And trade is art, and art's philosophy, in Paris. There's a silk for instance, there, as worth an artist's study for the folds as that bronze opposite. Nay, The bronze has faults, art's here too artful, conscious as a maid who leans to mark her shadow on the wall until she lose a vantage in her step. Yet art walks forward, and knows where to walk. The artists also are idealists, too absolute for nature, logical to austerity in the application of the special theory, not a soul content to paint a crooked pollard and an ass, as the English will because they find it so and like it somehow. There the old Tuileries is pulling its high cap down on its size, confounded, conscience-stricken, and amazed by the apparition of a new fair face in those devouring mirrors. Through the grate within the gardens, what a heap of babes, swept up like leaves beneath the chestnut trees from every street and alley of the town, by ghosts perhaps that blow too bleak this way are looking for their heads. Dear pretty babes, I wish them luck to have their bold play out before the next change. Here the air is thronged with statues poised upon their columns fine, as if to stand a moment or a feat, against that blue. What squares, what breathing room for a nation that runs fast, runs against the dentist's teeth at the corner in pale rows, which grin at progress, in an epigram. I walk the day out, listening to the chink of the first Napoleon's bones in his second grave, by victories guarded neath the golden dome that caps all Paris like a bubble. Ampersand quo. Shall these dry bones live? Ampersand quo. Thought Louis Philippe once, and lived you know. He ran his argument for kings and politicians, but still more for poets, who bear buckets to the well of ampler draught. These crowds are very good for meditation when we are very strong, though love of beauty makes us timorous, and draws us backward from the coarse town sights to count the daisies upon dappled fields and hear the streams bleat on among the hills in innocent and indolent repose, while still with silken elegiac thoughts we wind out from us the distracting world and die into the chrysalis of a man, and leave the best that may, to come of us, in some brown moth. I would be bold and bare to look into the swarthiest face of things, for God's sake who has made them. 6 days' work. The last day shutting twixt its dawn and eve the whole work bettered of the previous 5. Since God collected and resumed in man the firmaments, the strata, and the lights, fish, fowl, and beast, and insect, all their trains of various life caught back upon his arm, reorganized, and constituted man, the microcosm, the adding up of works, within whose fluttering nostrils, then at last consummating himself the maker sighed, as some strong winner at the footrace sighs touching the goal. Humanity is great, and, if I would not rather pour upon an ounce of common, ugly, human dust, an artisan's palm or a peasant's brow, unsmooth, ignoble, save to me and God, than track old Nilus to his silver roots, or wait on all the changes of the moon among the mountain peaks of Thessaly until her magic crystal round itself for many a witch to see and set it down as weakness, strength by no means. How is this, that men of science, osteologists and surgeons, beat some poets in respect for nature, count not common or unclean, spend raptures upon perfect specimens of indurated veins, distorted joints, or beautiful new cases of curved spine, while we are shocked at nature's falling off, we dare to shrink back from her warts and blains, we will not, when she sneezes, look at her, not even to say and quo. God bless her and quo. That's our wrong. For that, she will not trust us often with her larger sense of beauty and desire, but tethers us to a lily or a rose and bids us dight on the dew inside, left ignorant that the hungry beggar boy who stares unseen against our absent eyes, and wonders at the gods that we must be, to pass so careless for the oranges, bears yet a breastful of a fellow world to this world, undisparaged, undespoiled, and while we scorn him for a flower or two, as being, heaven help us, less poetical, contains himself both flowers and firmaments and surging seas and spectable stars and all that we would push him out of sight in order to see nearer. Let us pray God's grace to keep God's image in repute, that so, the poet and philanthropist. Even I and Romney may stand side by side, because we both stand face to face with men, contemplating the people in the rough, yet each so follow a vocation, his and mine. I walked on, musing with myself on life and art, and whether after all a larger metaphysics might not help our physics, a completer poetry adjust our daily life and vulgar wants more fully than the special outside plans, phalansteries, material institutes, the civil conscriptions and lay monasteries preferred by modern thinkers, as they thought the bread of man indeed made all his life, and washing 7 times in the end quo. People's baths and quo. Were sovereign for a people's leprosy, still leaving out the essential prophet's word that comes in power. On which, we thunder down, we prophets, poets, virtues in the word. The Maker burnt the darkness up with haze, to inaugurate the use of vocal life. And, plant a poet's word even, deep enough in any man's breast, looking presently for offshoots. You have done more for the man than if you dressed him in a broadcloth coat and warmed his Sunday pottage at your fire. Yet Romney leaves me. God. What face is that? Oh Romney, oh Marion. Walking on the quays and pulling thoughts to pieces leisurely, as if I caught the grasses in a field and bit them slow between my absent lips and shred them with my hands. What face is that? What a face, what a look, what a likeness. Full on mine the sudden blow of it came down, till all my blood swam, my eyes dazzled. Then I sprang. It was as if a meditative man were dreaming out a summer afternoon and watching gnats a prick upon a pond, when something floats up suddenly, out there, turns over. A dead face, known once alive. So old, so new. It would be dreadful now to lose the sight and keep the doubt of this. He plunges He has lost it in the splash. I plunged. I tore the crowd up, either side, and rushed on, forward, after her. Her? Whom? A woman sauntered slow in front, munching an apple. She left off amazed as if I had snatched it. That's not she, at least. A man walked arm-linked with a lady veiled. Both heads dropped closer than the need of talk. They started. He forgot her with his face, and she, herself, and clung to him as if my look were fatal. Such a stream of folk, and all with cares and business of their own. I ran the whole key down against their eyes. No Marion. Nowhere Marion. Almost, now, I could call Marion, Marion, with the shriek of desperate creatures calling for the dead. Where is she? Was she? Was she anywhere? I stood still, breathless, gazing, straining out in every uncertain distance, till at last a gentleman abstracted as myself came full against me, then resolved the clash in voluble excuses, obviously some learned member of the Institute upon his way there, walking, for his health, while meditating on the last and quo discourse. Ampersand quo. Pinching the empty air twixt finger and thumb, from which the snuff being ousted by that shock defiled his snow-white waistcoat duly pricked at the buttonhole with honorable red. Ampersand quo. Madam, your pardon, ampersand quo. There he swerved from me a meter, as confounded as he had heard the Demal would be chosen to fill up the next chair vacant, by his and quo. Man in us. Ampersand quo. Since when was genius found respectable? It passes in its place, indeed, which means the 7th floor back, or else the hospital. Revolving pistols are ingenious things, but prudent men academicians are scarce keep them in the cupboard next the prunes. And so, abandoned through bitter mirth, I loitered to my inn. O world, O jurists, rhymers, dreamers, what you please, we play a weary game of hide and seek. We shape a figure of our fantasy, call nothing something, and run after it and lose it, lose ourselves too in the search, till clash against us comes a somebody who also has lost something and is lost, philosopher against philanthropist, academician against poet, man against woman, against the living the dead, then home, with a bad headache and worse jest, to change the water for my heliotropes and yellow roses. Paris has such flowers, but England, also. 'Twas a yellow rose, by that south window of the little house, my cousin Romney gathered with his hand on all my birthdays for me, save the last. And then I shook the tree too rough, for roses to stay after. Now, my maps. I must not linger here from Italy till the last nightingale is tired of song, and the last firefly dies off in the maze. My soul's in haste to leap into the sun and scorch and seethe itself to a finer mood, which here, in this chill north, is apt to stand too stiffly in former molds. That face persists, it floats up, it turns over in my mind, as like to Marian as one dead is like the same alive. In very deed a face and not a fancy, though it vanished so. The small fair face between the darks of hair, I used to liken, when I saw her first, to a point of moonlit water down a well, the low brow, the frank space between the eyes, which always had the brown, pathetic look of a dumb creature who had been beaten once and never since was easy with the world. Ah, now I remember perfectly those eyes, today, how overlarge they seemed, as if some patient, passionate despair, like a cold drop and forgot-on tapestry, which slowly burns a widening circle out, had burnt them larger, larger. And those eyes, today, I do remember, saw me too, as I saw them, with conscious lids astrain and recognition. Now a fantasy, a simple shade or image of the brain, is merely passive, does not retroact, is seen, but sees not. 'Twas a real face, perhaps a real Marian. Which being so, I ought to write to Romney, ampersand quo. Marian's here. Be comforted for Marian. Ampersand quo. My pen fell, my hands struck sharp together, as hands do which hold at nothing. Can I write to him a half-truth? Can I keep my own soul blind to the other half? The worse? What are our souls, if still, to run on straight a sober pace nor start at every pebble or dead leaf? They must wear blinkers, ignore facts, suppress 6/10 of the road. Confront the truth, my soul. And oh, as truly as that was Marian's face, the arms of that same Marian clasped the thing. Not hid so well beneath the scanty shawl, I cannot name it now for what it was. A child. Small business as a castaway like Marian with that crown of prosperous wives at which the gentlest she grows arrogant and says and quo. My child. Ampersand quo. Who finds an emerald ring on a beggar's middle finger and requires more testimony to convict a thief. A child's too costly for so mere a wretch. She filched it somewhere, and it means, with her, instead of honor, blessing, merely shame. I cannot write to Romney, ampersand quo. Here she is, here's Marian found. I'll set you on her track, I saw her here, in Paris. And her child. She put away your love 2 years ago, but, plainly, not to starve. You suffered then. And, now that you've forgot her utterly as any last year's annual, in whose place you've planted a thick flowering evergreen, I choose, being kind, to write and tell you this to make you wholly easy. She's not dead, but only damned. Ampersand quo. Stop there, I go too fast. I'm cruel like the rest, in haste to take the first stir in the air as for a rat, and set my barking, biting thoughts upon single quotee. A child. What then? Suppose a neighbor's sick, and asked her, ampersand quo. Marian, carry out my child in the spring air, ampersand quo. I punish her for that? Or say, the child should hold her round the neck for good child reasons, that he liked it so and would not leave her. She had winning ways. I brand her therefore that she took the child? Not so. I will not write to Ronnie Leigh, for now he's happy, and she may indeed be guilty, and the knowledge of her fault would draggle his smooth time. But I, whose days are not so fine they cannot bear the rain, and who moreover having seen her face must see it again, will see it, by my hopes of one day seeing heaven too. The police shall track her, hound her, ferret their own soil. We'll dig this Paris to its catacombs, but certainly we'll find her, have her out, and save her, if she will or will not, child or no child. If a child, then one to save. The long weeks passed on without consequence. As easy find a footstep on the sand the morning after springtide, as the trace of Marian's feet between the incessant surfs of this live flood. She may have moved this way, but so the starfish does, and crosses out the dent of her small shoe. The foiled police renounced me. Quo. Could they find a girl and child, no other signalement but girl and child? No data shown but noticeable eyes and hair and masses, low upon the brow, as if it were an iron crown impressed? Friends heighten, and suppose they specify, why, girls with hair and eyes are everywhere in Paris. They had turned me up in vain. No Marian Earl indeed, but certainly Mathildes, Justines, Victorias. Or, if I sought the English, Betsy's, Sarah's, by the score, they might as well go out into the fields to find a speckled bean, that's somehow specked, and somewhere in the pod. Quo. They left me so. Shall I leave Marian? Have I dreamed a dream? I thank God I have found her. I must say quo. Thank God, quo. For finding her, although 'tis true I find the world more sad and wicked for single quotee. But I'll write about her, presently. My hands a-tremble, as I had just caught up my heart to write with, in the place of it. At least should take these letters to be writ at sea, in storm. Wait now. A simple chance did all. I could not sleep last night, and, tired of turning on my pillow in harder thoughts, went out at early morning, when the air is delicate with some last starry touch, to wander through the marketplace of flowers, the prettiest haunt in Paris, and make sure at worst that there were roses in the world. So wandering, musing, with the artist's eye, that keeps the shade side of the thing it loves, half absent, whole observing, while the crowd of young, vivacious, and black-braided heads dipped, quick as finches in a blossom tree, among the nosegays, cheapening this and that in such a cheerful twitter of rapid speech. My heart leapt in me, startled by a voice that slowly, faintly, with long breaths that marked the interval between the wish and word, inquired in stranger's French, quo. Would that be much, that branch of flowering mountain gorse? Quo. Quo. So much? Too much for me, then. Quo. Turning the face round so close upon me that I felt this eye it termed with. Quo. Marian, Marian. Quo. Face to face. Quo. Marian. I find you. Shall I let you go? Quo. I held her two slight wrists with both my hands. Quo. Ah, Marian, Marian, can I let you go? Quo. She fluttered from me like a cyclamen, as white, which taken in a sudden wind beats on against the palisade. Quo. Let pass, quo. She said at last. Quo. I will not, quo. I replied. Quo. I lost my sister Marian many days, and sought her ever in my walks and prayers, and, now I find her. Do we throw away the bread we worked and prayed for, crumble it and drop it? to do even so by thee, whom still I've hungered after more than bread, my sister Marion? Can I hurt thee, dear? Then why distrust me? Never tremble so. Come with me rather where we'll talk and live, and none shall vex us. I've a home for you and me and no one else. Ampersand quo. She shook her head. Ampersand quo. A home for you and me and no one else ill suits one of us. I prefer to such, a roof of grass on which a flower might spring, less costly to me than the cheapest here. And yet I could not, at this hour, afford a like home even. That you offer yours, I thank you. You are good as heaven itself, as good as one I knew before. Farewell. Ampersand quo. I loosed her hands. Ampersand quo. In his name, no farewell. Ampersand quo. She stood as if I held her. Ampersand quo. For his sake, Romney's. By the good he meant, always. By the love he pressed for once, and by the grief, reproach, abandonment, he took in change and quo. Ampersand quo. He? Romney. Who grieved him? Who had the heart for single quotty? What reproach touched him? Be merciful, speak quickly. Ampersand quo. Ampersand quo. Therefore come, ampersand quo. I answered with authority. Ampersand quo. I think we dare to speak such things and name such names in the open squares of Paris. Ampersand quo. Not a word she said, but in a gentle humbled way, as one who had forgot herself in grief, turned round and followed closely where I went, as if I led her by a narrow plank across devouring waters, step by step. And so in silence we walked on a mile. And then she stopped, her face was white as wax. Ampersand quo. We go much farther? Ampersand quo. Ampersand quo. You are ill, ampersand quo. I asked, ampersand quo. Or tired? Ampersand quo. She looked the wider for her smile. Ampersand quo. There's one at home, ampersand quo. She said, ampersand quo. Has need of me by this time, and I must not let him wait. Ampersand quo. Ampersand quo. Not even, ampersand quo. I asked, ampersand quo. To hear of Romney Leigh? Ampersand quo. Ampersand quo. Not even, ampersand quo. She said, ampersand quo. To hear of Mr. Leigh? Ampersand quo. Ampersand quo. In that case, ampersand quo. I resumed, ampersand quo. I go with you, and we can talk the same thing there is here. None waits for me, I have my day to spend. Ampersand quo. Her lips moved in a spasm without a sound, but then she spoke. Ampersand quo. It shall be as you please. And better so 'tis shorter seen than told, and though you will not find me worth your pains, that, even, may be worth some pains to know for one as good as you are. Ampersand quo. Then she led the way, and I, as by a narrow plank across devouring waters, followed her, stepping by her footsteps, breathing by her breath, and holding her with eyes that would not slip. And so, without a word, we walked a mile, and so, another mile, without a word. Until the peopled streets being all dismissed, house rows and groups all scattered like a flock, the market gardens thickened, and the long white walls beyond, like spiders outside threads, stretched, feeling blindly toward the country fields, through half-built habitations and half-dug foundations, intervals of trenchant chalk that bit betwixt the grassy uneven turfs where goats, vine tendrils trailing from their mouths, stood perched on edges of the slarret which should be, staring as about to leap to find their coming Bacchus. All the place seemed less a cultivation than a waste. Men work here, only, scarce begin to live, all sad, the country struggling with the town, like an untamed hawk upon a strong man's fist, that beats its wings and tries to get away, and cannot choose be satisfied so soon to hop through courtyards with its right foot tied, the vintage plains and pastoral hills in sight. We stopped beside a house too high and slim to stand there by itself, but waiting till 5 others, 2 on this side, 3 on that, should grow up from the sullen second floor they was at now, to build it to a row. The upper windows partly were unglazed meantime, a meagre, unripe house, a line of rigid poplars elbowed it behind, and, just in front, beyond the lime and bricks that wrung the grass between it and the road, a great acacia with its slender trunk and overpass of multitudinous leaves in which 100 fields might spill their dew and intense verdure, yet find room enough, stood reconciling all the place with green. I followed up the stair upon her step. She hurried upward, shot across a face, a woman's, on the landing, quo. How now? Is no one to have holidays but you? You said an hour, and stayed 3 hours, I think, and Julie waiting for your betters here? Why, if he had waked he might have waked, for me. Quo. Just murmuring an excusing word, she passed and shut the rest out with the chamber door, myself shut in beside her. 'Twas a room scarce larger than a grave, and near as bare. 2 stools, a pallet bed. I saw the room. A mouse could find no sort of shelter in single quote, much less a greater secret. Curtainless, the window fixed you with its torturing eye, defying you to take a step apart if peradventure you would hide a thing. I saw the whole room, I and Marion there alone. Alone? She threw her bonnet off, then, sighing as 'twere sighing the last time, approached the bed, and drew a shawl away. You could not peel a fruit you feared to bruise more calmly and more carefully than so, nor would you find within, a rosier flushed pomegranate. There he lay upon his back, the yearling creature, warm and moist with life to the bottom of his dimples, to the ends of the lovely tumbled curls about his face. For since he had been covered over much to keep him from the light glare, both his cheeks were hot and scarlet. As the first live rose, the shepherd's heart blood ebbed away into the faster for his love. And love was here as instant. In the pretty baby mouth, shut close as if for dreaming that it sucked, the little naked feet, drawn up the way of nestled birdlings. Everything so soft and tender, to the tiny whole-fessed hands, which, closing on a finger into sleep, had kept the mold of single quote. While we stood there dumb, for oh, that it should take such innocence to prove just guilt, I thought, and stood there dumb, the light upon his eyelids pricked them wide, and, staring out at us with all their blue, as half perplexed between the anglehood he had been away to visit in his sleep, and our most mortal presence, gradually he saw his mother's face, accepting it in change for heaven itself with such a smile as might have well been learnt there, never moved, but smiled on, in a drowse of ecstasy, so happy, half with her and half with heaven. He could not have the trouble to be stirred, but smiled and lay there. Like a rose, I said. As red and still indeed as any rose, that blows in all the silence of its leaves, content in blowing to fulfill its life. She leaned above him, drinking him as wine. In that extremity of love, 'twill pass for agony or rapture, seeing that love includes the whole of nature, rounding it to love. No more, since more can never be than just love. Self forgot, cast out of self, and drowning in the transport of the sight, her whole pale passionate face, mouth, forehead, eyes, one gaze, she stood, then, slowly as he smiled she smiled too, slowly, smiling unaware, and drawing from his countenance to hers a fainter red, as if she watched a flame and stood in it aglow. Quo. How beautiful, quo, said she. I answered, trying to be cold. Must sin have compensations, was my thought, as if it were a holy thing like grief. And is a woman to be fooled aside from putting vice down, with that woman's toy a baby? Ampersand quo. A. The child is well enough, ampersand quo. I answered. Ampersand quo. If his mother's palms are clean, then he'd be glad of course in clasping such. But if not, I would rather lay my hand, were I she, on God's brazen altar bars red hot with burning sacrificial lambs, than touch the sacred curls of such a child. Ampersand quo. She plunged her fingers in his clustering locks, as one who would not be afraid of fire. And then with indrawn steady utterance said, Ampersand quo. My lamb, my lamb. Although, through such as thou, the most unclean got courage and approach to God, once, now they cannot, even with men, find grace enough for pity and gentle words. Ampersand quo. Ampersand quo. My Marian, ampersand quo. I made answer, grave and sad, ampersand quo. The priest who stole a lamb to offer him, was still a thief. And if a woman steals through God's own barrier hedges of true love, which fence out license in securing love, a child like this, that smiles so in her face, she is no mother, but a kidnapper, and he's a dismal orphan, not a son, whom all her kisses cannot feed so fully will not miss hereafter a pure home to live in, a pure heart to lean against, a pure good mother's name and memory to hope by, when the world grows thick and bad and he feels out for a virtue. Ampersand quo. Ampersand quo. Oh, ampersand quo. She smiled with bitter patience, ampersand quo. The child takes his chance? Not much worse off in being fatherless than I was, fathered. He will say, belike, his mother was the saddest creature born. He'll say his mother lived so contrary to joy, that even the kindest, seeing her, grew sometimes almost cruel. He'll not say she flew contrarious in the face of God with bat wings of her vices. Stole my child, my flower of earth, my only flower on earth, my sweet, my beauty. Ampersand quo. Up she snatched the child, and, breaking on him in a storm of tears, drew out her long sobs from their shivering roots, until he took it for a game, and stretched his feet and flapped his eager arms like wings and crowed and gurgled through his infant laugh. Ampersand quo. Mine, mine, ampersand quo. She said. Ampersand quo. I have as sure a right as any glad proud mother in the world, who sets her darling down to cut his teeth upon her church ring. If she talks of law, I talk of law. I claim my mother dues by law, the law which now is paramount, the common law, by which the poor and weak are trodden underfoot by vicious men, and loathed forever after by the good. Let pass. I did not filch, I found the child. Ampersand quo. Ampersand quo. You found him, Marian? Ampersand quo. Ampersand quo. I found him where I found my curse, in the gutter, with my shame. What have you, any of you, to say to that, who all are happy, and sit safe and high, and never spoke before to arraign my right to grief itself? What? Being beaten down by hoofs of maddened oxen into a ditch, half dead, whole mangled, when a girl at last breathes, sees, and finds there, bedded in her flesh because of the extremity of the shock, some coin of price. And when a good man comes, that's God. The best men are not quite as good, and says I drop the coin there, take it you, and keep it, it shall pay you for the loss. You all put up your finger, see the thief. Observe what precious thing she has come to filch. How bad those girls are. Oh, my flower, my pet, I dare forget I have you in my arms and fly off to be angry with the world, and fright you, hurt you with my tempers, till ye double up your lip. Why, that indeed is bad, a naughty mother. Ampersand quo. Ampersand quo. You mistake, ampersand quo. I interrupted. Ampersand quo. If I love you not, I should not, Marion, certainly be here. Ampersand quo. Ampersand quo. Alas, ampersand quo, she said. Ampersand quo. You are so very good. And yet I wish indeed you had never come to make me sob until I vex the child. It is not wholesome for these pleasure plants to be so early watered by our brine. And then, who knows? He may not like me now as well, perhaps, as he saw me fret, one's ugly fretting. He has eyes the same as angels, but he cannot see as deep, and so I've kept forever in his sight a sort of smile to please him, as you place a green thing from the garden in a cup, to make believe it grows there. Look, my sweet, my cowslip ball. We've done with that cross face, and here's the face come back you used to like. Ah, ah. He laughs. He likes me. Ah, Miss Leigh, you're great and pure. But were you purer still, as if you had walked, we'll say, no other where than up and down the New Jerusalem, and held your trailing lute string up yourself from brushing the 12 stones, for fear of some small speck as little as a needle prick, white stitched on white, the child would keep to me, would choose his poor lost Marion, like me best, and, though you stretched your arms, cry back and cling, as we do when God says it's time to die and bids us go up higher. Leave us, then? We two are happy. Does he push me off? He's satisfied with me, as I with him. Ampersand quo. Ampersand quo. So soft to one, so hard to others. Nay, ampersand quo. I cried, more angry that she melted me. Ampersand quo. We make henceforth a cushion of our faults to sit and practice easy virtues on? I thought a child was given to sanctify a woman, set her in the sight of all the clear-eyed heavens, a chosen minister to do their business and lead spirits up the difficult blue heights. A woman lives, not bettered, quickened toward the truth and good through being a mother? Then she's none. Although she damps her baby's cheeks by kissing them, as we kill roses. Ampersand quo. Ampersand quo. Kill. O Christ, ampersand quo, she said, and turned her wild sad face from side to side with most despairing wonder in it. Ampersand quo. What have you in your souls against me then, all of you? Am I wicked, do you think? God knows me, trusts me with the child. But you think me really wicked? Ampersand quo. Ampersand quo. Complacent, ampersand quo. I answered softly, ampersand quo. 'Twere wrong you've done, because of certain prophets, which is wrong beyond the first wrong, Marion. When you left the pure place and the noble heart, to take the hand of a seducer and quo. Ampersand quo. Whom? Whose hand? I took the hand of and quo. Springing up erect, and lifting up the child at full arm's length, as if to bear him like an rifle unconquerable to armies of reproach, ampersand quo. By him, ampersand quo, she said, ampersand quo. My child's head in its curls, by these blue eyes no woman born could dare a perjury on. I make my mother's oath, that if I left that heart, to lighten it, the blood of mine was still, except for grief. No cleaner maid than I was took a step to a sadder end, no matron mother now looks backward to her early maidenhood through chaster pulses. I speak steadily. And if I lie so? If, being fouled in will and paltered within soul by devil's lust, I dared to bid this angel take my part, would God sit quiet, let us think, in heaven, nor strike me dumb with thunder? Yet I speak, he clears me therefore. What, seduced's your word? Do wolves seduce a wandering fawn in France? Do eagles, who have pinched a lamb with claws, seduce it into carrion? So with me. I was not ever, as you say, seduced, but simply murdered. Ampersand quo. There she paused, and sighed with such a sigh as drops from agony to exhaustion, sighing while she let the babe slide down upon her bosom from her arms, and all her face's light fell after him like a torch quenched and falling. Down she sank, and sat upon the bedside with the child. But I, convicted, broken utterly, with woman's passion clung about her waist and kissed her hair and eyes, Ampersand quo. I have been wrong, sweet Marian, and quo. Weeping in a tender rage. Ampersand quo. Sweet holy Marian. And now, Marian, now, I'll use your oath although my lips are hard, and by the child, my Marian, by the child, I swear his mother shall be innocent before my conscience, as any open book of him who reads for judgment. Innocent, my sister. Let the night be ne'er so dark, the moon is surely somewhere in the sky. So surely is your whiteness to be found through all dark facts. But pardon me, and smile a little, Marian, for the child, if not for me, my sister. Ampersand quo. The poor lip just motioned for the smile and let it go, and then, with scarce a stirring of the mouth, as if a statue spoke that could not breathe, but spoke uncalm between its marble lips, Ampersand quo. I'm very glad you clear me so. I should be sorry that you set me down with harlots, or with even a better name which misbecomes his mother. For the rest, I am not on a level with your love, nor ever was, you know, but now am worse, because that world of yours has dealt with me as when the hard sea bites and chews a stone and changes the first form of it. I've marked a shore of pebbles bitten to one shape from all the various life of madrepores. And so, that little stone, called Marian Earl, picked up and dropped by you and another friend, was ground and tortured by the incessant sea and bruised from what she was, changed. Death's a change, and she, I said, was murdered. Marian's dead. What can you do with people when they are dead but, if you are pious, sing a hymn and go. Or, if you are tender, heave a sigh and go. But go by all means, and permit the grass to keep its green feud up twixt them and you? Then leave me, let me rest. I'm dead, I say, and if, to save the child from death as well, the mother in me has survived the rest, why, that's God's miracle you must not tax. I'm not less dead for that, I'm nothing more but just a mother. Only for the child I'm warm, and cold, and hungry, and afraid, and smell the flowers a little and see the sun, and speak still, and am silent, just for him. I pray you therefore to mistake me not and treat me happily as I were alive. For though you're an opinion to my soul, I think it would not hurt nor trouble me. Here's proof, dear lady, in the marketplace. But now, you promised me to say a word about a friend, who once, long years ago, took God's place toward me, when he leans and loves and does not thunder. Whom at last I left, as all of us leave God. You thought perhaps I seemed to care for hearing of that friend? Now, judge me. We have sat here half an hour and talked together of the child and me, and I not asked as much as what's the thing you had to tell me of the friend. The friend? He's sad, I think you said. He's sick perhaps? 'Tis not to Marian if he's sad or sick. Another would have crawled beside your foot and prayed your words out. Why, a beast, a dog, a starved cat, if he had fed it once with milk, would show less hardness. But I'm dead, you see, and that explains it. Ampersand quo. Poor thing, she spoke and shook her head, as white and calm as frost on days too cold for raining any more, but still with such a face, so much alive, I could not choose but take it on my arm and stroke the placid patience of its cheeks, then told my story out, of Leigh, how, having lost her, sought her, missed her still, he, broken-hearted for himself and her, had drawn the curtains of the world a while as if he had done with morning. There I stopped, for when she gasped, and pressed me with her eyes, quo. And now? How is it with him? Tell me now, quo. I felt the shame of compensated grief, and chose my words with scruple. Slowly stepped upon the slippery stones set here and there across the sliding water. Quo. Certainly, as evening empties morning into night, another morning takes the evening up with healthful, providential interchange. And, though he thought still of her quo. Yes, she knew, she understood, she had supposed indeed that, as one stops a hole upon a flute, at which a new note comes and shapes the tune, excluding her would bring a worthier in, and, long ere this, that Lady Valdemar he loved so quo. Quo. Loved, quo. I started, quo. Loved her so. Now tell me quo. Quo. I will tell you, quo. She replied, quo. But, since we're taking oaths, you'll promise first that he in England, he, shall never learn in what a dreadful trap his creature here, round whose unworthy neck he had meant to tie the honorable ribbon of his name, fell unaware and came to butchery, because, I know him, as he takes to heart the grief of every stranger, he's not like to banish mine as far as I should choose in wishing him most happy. Now he leaves to think of me, perverse, who went my way, unkind, and left him, but if once he knew. Ah, then, the sharp nail of my cruel wrong would fasten me forever in his sight, like some poor curious bird, through each spread wing nailed high up over a fierce hunter's fire, to spoil the dinner of all tenderer folk come in by chance. Nay, since your Marian's dead, you shall not hang her up, but dig a hole and bury her in silence. Ring no bells. Quo. I answered gaily, though my whole voice wept, quo. We'll ring the joy bells, not the funeral bells, because we have her back, dead or alive. Quo. She never answered that, but shook her head. Then low and calm, as one who, safe in heaven, shall tell a story of his lower life, unmoved by shame or anger, so she spoke. She told me she had loved upon her knees, as others pray, more perfectly absorbed in the act and inspiration. She felt his for just his uses, not her own at all, his stool, to sit on or put up his foot, his cup, to fill with wine or vinegar, whichever drink might please him at the chance, for that should please her always. Let him write his name upon her. It seemed natural. It was most precious, standing on his shelf, to wait until he chose to lift his hand. Well, I saw her then, and must have seen how bright her life went floating on her love, like wicks the housewife's cinder float on oil which feeds them to a flame that lasts the night. To do good seemed so much his business, that, having done it, she was fain to think, must fill up his capacity for joy. At first she never mooted with herself if he was happy, since he made her so, or if he loved her, being so much beloved. Who thinks of asking if the sun is light, observing that it lightens? Who's so bold to question God of his felicity? Still less. And thus she took for granted what first of all she should have put to proof, and sinned against him so, but only so. Quo. What could you hope, quo? She said, quo. Of such as she? You take a kid you like, and turn it out in some fair garden, though the creature's fond and gentle, it will leap upon the beds and break your tulips, bite your tender trees. The wonder would be if such innocence spoiled less. A garden is no place for kids. Quo. And, by degrees, when he who had chosen her brought in his courteous and benignant friends to spend their goodness on her, which she took so very gladly, as a part of his. By slow degrees it broke on her slow sense that she too in that Eden of delight was out of place, and, like the silly kid, still did most mischief where she meant most love. A thought enough to make a woman mad. No beast in this but she may well go mad. That saying and quo. I am thine to love and use and quo. May blow the plague in her protesting breath to the very man for whom she claims to die, that, clinging round his neck, she pulls him down and drowns him, and that, lavishing her soul, she hails perdition on him. Ampersand quo. So, being mad, ampersand quo, said Marian. Ampersand quo. Ah, who stirred such thoughts, you ask? Whose fault it was, that she should have such thoughts? None's fault, none's fault. The light comes, and we see, but if it were not truly for our eyes, there would be nothing seen, for all the light. And so with Marian, if she saw at last, the sense was in her. Lady Valdemar had spoken all in vain else. Ampersand quo. Ampersand quo. O my heart, O prophet in my heart, ampersand quo. I cried aloud, ampersand quo. Then Lady Valdemar spoke. Ampersand quo. Ampersand quo. Did she speak? Ampersand quo. Mused Marian softly, ampersand quo. Or did she only sign? Or did she put a word into her face and look, and so impress you with the word? Or leave it in the foldings of her gown, like rosemary smells a movement will shake out when no one's conscious? Who shall say, or guess? One thing alone was certain from the day the gracious lady paid a visit first, she, Marian, saw things different, felt distrust of all that sheltering roof of circumstance her hopes were building into with clayness. Her heart was restless, pacing up and down and fluttering, like dumb creatures before storms, not knowing wherefore she was ill at ease. Ampersand quo. Ampersand quo. And still the lady came. Ampersand quo, said Marian Earl. Ampersand quo. Much oftener than he knew it, Mr. Leigh. She bade me never tell him she had come. She liked to love me better than he knew. So very kind was Lady Valdemar, and every time she brought with her more light, and every light made sorrow clearer. Well, well. We cannot give her blame for that. 'Twould be the same thing if an angel came, whose right should prove our wrong. And every time the lady came, she looked more beautiful and spoke more like a flute among green trees, until at last, as one, whose heart being sad on hearing lovely music, suddenly dissolves in weeping, I break out in tears before her, asked her counsel, had I erred in being too happy? Would she set me straight? For she, being wise and good and born above the flats I had never climbed from, could perceive if such as I might grow upon the hills, and whether such poor herb sufficed to grow, for Romney Leigh to break his fast upon single quotee, or would he pine on such, or haply starve? She wrapped me in her generous arms at once, and let me dream a moment how it feels to have a real mother, like some girls, but when I looked, her face was younger. Youth's too bright not to be a little hard, and beauty keeps itself still uppermost, that's true. Though Lady Valdemar was kind, she hurt me, as if the morning sun should smite us on the eyelids when we sleep, and wake us up with headache. And soon was light enough to make my heart ache too. She told me truths I asked for. 'Twas my fault, that Romney could not love me, if he would, as men call loving. There are bloods that flow together like some rivers and not mix, through contraries of nature. He indeed was set to wed me, to espouse my class, act out a rash opinion, and, once wed, so just a man and gentle could not choose but make my life as smooth as marriage ring, bespeak me mildly, keep me a cheerful house, with servants, brooches, all the flowers I liked, and pretty dresses, silk the whole year round. At which I stopped her, this for me. And now for him? She hesitated. Truth grew hard. She owned 'twas plain a man like Ronnie Leigh required a wife more level to himself. If day by day he had to bend his height to pick up sympathies, opinions, thoughts, and interchange the common talk of life which helps a man to live as well as talk, his days were heavily taxed. Who buys a staff to fit the hand that reaches but the knee? He'd feel it bitter to be forced to miss the perfect joy of married-suited pairs, who, bursting through the separating hedge of personal dues with that sweet eglantine of equal love, keep saying, quo. So we think, quo. It strikes us, that's our fancy. Quo. When I asked if earnest will, devoted love, employed in youth like mine, would fail to raise me up as two strong arms will always raise a child to a fruit hung overhead, she sighed and sighed. That could not be, she feared. You take a pink, you dig about its roots and water it and so improve it to a garden pink, but will not change it to a heliotrope, the kind remains. And then, the harder truth is Ronnie Leigh, so rash to leap a pale, so bold for conscience, quick for martyrdom, would suffer steadily and never flinch, but suffer surely and keenly, when his class turned shoulder on him for a shameful match, and set him up as ninepin in their talk to bowl him down with jestings. There, she paused. And when I used the pause in doubting that we wronged him after all in what we feared, suppose such things could never touch him more in his high conscience, if the things should be, then, when the queen sits in an upper room, the horses in the street can spatter her. A moment, hope came, but the lady closed that door and nicked the lock and shut it out, observing wisely that the tender heart which made him oversoft to a lower class, would scarcely fail to make him sensitive to a higher, how they thought and what they felt. Quo. Alas, alas. Quo. Said Marian, rocking slow the pretty baby who was near asleep, the eyelids creeping over the blue balls. Quo. She made it clear, too clear I saw the whole. And yet who knows if I had seen my way straight out of it by looking, though 'twas clear, unless the generous lady, ware of this, had set her own house all afire for me to light me forwards. Leaning on my face her heavy agate eyes which crushed my will, she told me tenderly, as when men come to a bedside to tell people they must die, she knew knowledge, of knowledge knew, that Ronnie Leigh had loved her formerly. And she loved him, she might say, now the chance was past, but that, of course, he never guessed, for something came between them, something thin as a cobweb, catching every fly of doubt to hold it buzzing at the window pane and help to dim the daylight. Ah, man's pride or woman's which is greatest? Most averse to brushing cobwebs. Well, but she and he remained fast friends. It seemed not more than so, because he had bound his hands and could not stir. An honorable man, if somewhat rash. And she, not even for Romney, would she spill a blot. As little even as a tear. Upon his marriage contract, not to gain a better joy for two than came by that, for, though I stood between her heart and heaven, she loved me wholly. Quo. Did I laugh or curse? I think I sat there silent, hearing all, hearing double, Marian's tale, at once, and Ronnie's marriage vow, quo. I'll keep to thee, quo. Which means that woman serpent. Is it time for church now? Quo. Lady Valdemar spoke more, quo. Continued Marian, quo. But, as when a soul will pass out through the sweetness of a song beyond it, though jogging the uphill road, even so mine wandered from the things I heard to those I suffered. It was afterward I shaped the resolution to the act. For many hours we talked. What need to talk? The fate was clear and close. It touched my eyes. But still the generous lady tried to keep the case afloat, and would not let it go, and argued, struggled upon Marian's side, which was not Ronnie's. Though she little knew what ugly monster would take up the end, what griping death within the drowning death was ready to complete my sum of death. Quo. I thought, perhaps he's sliding now the ring upon that woman's finger. She went on, Quo. The lady, failing to prevail her way, upgathered my torn wishes from the ground and pieced them with her strong benevolence. And, as I thought I could breathe freer air away from England, going without pause, without farewell, just breaking with a jerk the blossomed offshoot from my thorny life, she promised kindly to provide the means, with instant passage to the colonies and full protection, would commit me straight to one who once had been her waiting maid and had the customs of the world, intent on changing England for Australia herself, to carry out her fortune so. For which I thanked the Lady Valdemar, as men upon their deathbeds thank last friends who lay the pillow straight. It is not much, and yet 'tis all of which they are capable, this lying smoothly in a bed to die. And so, 'twas fixed. And so, from day to day, the woman named came in to visit me. Quo. Just then the girl stopped speaking, sat erect, and stared at me as if I had been a ghost. Perhaps I looked as white as any ghost, with large-eyed horror. Quo. Does God make, Quo? She said, Quo. All sorts of creatures really, do you think? Or is it that the devil slavers them so excellently, that we come to doubt who's stronger, he who makes, or he who mars? I never liked the woman's face or voice or ways. It made me blush to look at her. It made me tremble if she touched my hand. And when she spoke a fondling word I shrank as if one hated me who had power to hurt. And, every time she came, my veins ran cold as somebody were walking on my grave. At last I spoke to Lady Valdemar, could such an one be good to trust? I asked. Whereat the lady stroked my cheek and laughed her silver laugh. One must be born to laugh, to put such music in it. Foolish girl, your scattered wits are gathering wool beyond the sheep-walk reaches. Leave the thing to me. And therefore, half in trust, and half in scorn that I had heart still for another fear and such a safe despair, I left the thing. Quo. The rest is short. I was obedient. I wrote my letter which delivered him from Marian to his own prosperities, and followed that bad guide. The lady? Hush, I never blame the lady. Ladies who sit high, however willing to look down, will scarce see lower than their dainty feet. And Lady Valdemar saw less than I. With what a devil's daughter I went forth along the swine's road, down the precipice, in such a curl of hell foam caught and choked. No shriek of soul and anguish could pierce through to fetch some help. They say there's help in heaven for all such cries. But if one cries from hell, what then? The heavens are deaf upon that side. Quo. A woman. Hear me, let me make it plain. A woman. Not a monster. Both her breasts made right to suckle babes. She took me off a woman also, young and ignorant and heavy with my grief, my two poor eyes near washed away with weeping, till the trees, the blessed and accustomed trees and fields ran either side the train like stranger dogs unworthy of any notice, took me off so dull, so blind, so only half alive, not seeing by what road, nor by what ship, nor toward what place, nor to what end of all. Men carry a corpse thus, past the doorway, past the garden gate, the children's playground, up the green lane, then they leave it in the pit, to sleep in fine corruption, cheek to cheek with him who stinks since Friday. Quo. But suppose, to go down with one's soul into the grave, to go down half dead, half alive, I say, and wake up with corruption. Cheek to cheek with him who stinks since Friday. There it is, And that's the horror of single quote T, Miss E. Ampersand quo. You feel? You understand? No, do not look at me, but understand. The blank, blind, weary way, which led, where'er it led, away at least. The shifted ship, to Sydney or to France, still bound, wherever else, to another land. The swooning sickness on the dismal sea, the foreign shore, the shameful house, the night, the feeble blood, the heavy-headed grief. No need to bring their damnable drugged cup, and yet they brought it. Hell so prodigal of devil's gifts, hunts liberally in packs, will kill no poor small creature of the wilds, but 50 red-wide throats must smoke at it, as his at me. When waking up at last, I told you that I waked up in the grave. Ampersand quo. Enough so. It is plain enough so. True, we wretches cannot tell out all our wrong without offense to decent happy folk. I know that we must scrupulously hint with half-words, delicate reserves, the thing which no unscrupled we should feel in full. Let pass the rest, then. Only leave my oath upon this sleeping child. Man's violence, not man's seduction, made me what I am, as lost as. I told him I should be lost. When mothers fail us, can we help ourselves? That's fatal. And you call it being lost? That down came next day's noon and caught me there, half gibbering and half raving on the floor, and wondering what had happened up in heaven, that suns should dare to shine when God himself was certainly abolished. Ampersand quo. I was mad, how many weeks, I know not, many weeks. I think they let me go when I was mad, they feared my eyes and loosed me, as boys might a mad dog which they had tortured. Up and down I went, by road and village, over tracts of open foreign country, large and strange, crossed everywhere by long thin poplar lines like fingers of some ghastly skeleton hand through sunlight and through moonlight evermore pushed out from hell itself to pluck me back, and resolute to get me, slow and sure. While every roadside Christ upon his cross hung reddening through his gory wounds at me, and shook his nails in anger, and came down to follow a mile after, wading up the low vines and green wheat, crying, "Take the girl. She's none of mine from henceforth." Then I knew, but this is somewhat dimmer than the rest. The charitable peasants gave me bread and leave to sleep in straw, and twice they tied, at parting, Mary's image round my neck. How heavy it seemed! As heavy as a stone. A woman has been strangled with less weight. I threw it in a ditch to keep it clean and ease my breath a little, when none looked. I did not need such safeguards. Brutal men stopped short, Miss Leigh, in insult. When they had seen my face, I must have had an awful look. And so I lived. The weeks passed on, I lived. 'Twas living my old tramp life o'er again, but, this time, in a dream, and hunted round by some prodigious dream fear at my back, which ended yet, my brain cleared presently. And there I sat, one evening, by the road, I, Marian Earl, myself, alone, undone, facing a sunset low upon the flats as if it were the finish of all time, the great red stone upon my sepulchre, which angels were too weak to roll away.